Welcome back to Proxaim, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the Craftworld Eldar far-flung trait, the Wrath of the Dead, and we're going to be doing a short guide on how to use it most effectively. So basically, the Wrath of the Dead trait is something that a lot of you have probably overlooked in a lot of the far-flung lists, as have I, but it can actually be a very powerful tool to help Wraith armies deal with their biggest weakness, which is their speed and general inability to get the combats that they want to get into. So what we're going to be doing in this video is, first, we're going to be looking at what a heroic intervention is. We're going to be looking at the Wrath of the Dead Flung Craftworld trait. We're going to be talking about the advantages of the Wrath of the Dead trait, and we're also going to be talking about how to use this trait with Wraith units, Wraith Blades, Wraith Guard, Wraith Lords, and of course Wraith Knights, which also benefit from this trait. So first off, let's go ahead and talk about what a heroic intervention is. So basically, this happens after enemy units charge in, and normally it is only reserved for characters. So what happens is the enemy charges in, and as long as your character is not engaged, it can make a heroic intervention, which means that it can move up to 3 inches if enemy units are within 3 inches and engage that enemy unit. And placement is key to getting the most out of this ability, because if you are outside of that 3 inches, your character is not going to be able to actually activate this ability. So you do need to be within 3 inches of an enemy unit, or 5 inches vertically if you're in ruins or some sort of vertical structure like a building, but usually it's going to be within 3 inches. So you need to make sure that wherever your enemy ends up, they're going to be within 3 inches of your character. And to perform this, basically, if your unit is eligible to make that heroic intervention, then you move up to 3 inches toward the enemy unit, which should put you in base-to-base contact, or at least close enough. And most of the times, you're not going to be able to make it directly into base-to-base, but you'll at least be within 1 inch. So there may be friendly models' bases blocking your way so that you can't fully fit into base contact, but you don't need to. You have an engagement range of 1 inch. Remember that. So as long as the enemy unit ended its move within 3 inches of your character, you can perform that heroic intervention. So again, you don't need to be exactly in base contact with the enemy unit as long as they are within 3 inches. So you may be wondering, well, what does this have to do with Wrath of the Dead? I mean, Wraith constructs aren't characters. They can't perform heroic interventions. Well, the Wrath of the Dead trait actually allows Wraith construct units to be eligible to perform heroic interventions as if they were a character unit. So basically, they can perform this exactly the same as a character would. So basically, gives Wraith Blades, Wraith Guard, Wraith Lords, and Wraith Knights, anything that's a Wraith construct, except aircraft, the ability to perform these heroic interventions. So this gives all of your Wraith units an extreme amount of support potential when close to other units. And typically, if you are running a Wraith-centric army, you're going to have a lot of units that are in fairly close proximity with each other. And the thing about this is that oftentimes enemies can use this to their advantage by tying you up in close combat with units that are just meant as speed bumps. So Wrath of the Dead really helps get around these things and helps your units deal with units that they may not have been able to deal with by themselves. And it saves you time as well, because you don't have to charge that unit the next turn with some of your other elements. So, like I said, the advantages of Wrath of the Dead are many, and many of them we don't even really notice at first. So it allows your units to engage during your opponent's turn, indirectly granting you extra damage and movement. Yes, because remember, those units engaged are going to now be able to make a consolidation. They're going to be able to move that 3 inches for a heroic intervention and stuff like that. So it actually speeds up your army if the enemy or opponent is charging units into you. It also makes your opponent think twice about engaging your units. So if he is wanting to throw a trash unit into one of your Wraithblade units or Wraith Lords to tie them up in close combat, This will give him pause because he'll know that he'll have to fight multiple units at once and give you additional movement, right? So if he knows that he's going to give you additional movement by charging in, he may not be as readily willing to throw a unit into combat to tie you up for a turn, because not only will he not be able to tie you up successfully because you have the sheer amount of attacks from other units supporting, but you're going to gain extra movement from it. Your opponent is going to have to think twice about that. And lastly, this ability can allow you to break units out of combat so they can shoot and perform actions and charge something else the next turn, which I think is the main thing about this. It really makes it hard for your opponent to lock your units down in combat, because you're going to have so many elements fighting against their combat unit that you're just going to overpower them. So even Chaos Terminators, things like that, if they charge a unit of Chaos Terminators into your Wraith Blades or Wraith Lord, you can have Wraith Blades or, Wraith Lords coming in to support them and just basically wipe out that Terminator unit before they even have the chance to really do damage. Right? So it really makes it very hard for your opponents to be able to engage the units that they want to engage with without suffering quick and swift retaliation. And just to give you guys an example, that Chaos Terminator example I gave you guys, I actually used that recently, and Chaos Terminators do want to engage Wraith units in close combat because they're a little bit more effective in close combat than they are at shooting. They can do more damage and have more AP. So typically what will happen is they will try to charge into your unit, do a bunch of damage to your unit, and then hope that you can't really do a lot of damage back because they will have inflicted severe losses on you. Even Wraith Blades, by the way, with Force Shields, are not that strong against Power Fist wielding Terminators, especially with stratagems and stuff like that they can use to boost their damage even further. So in a one-on-one fight, if a unit of Wraith Blades tries to take on some upgraded Chaos Terminators, the Wraith Blades are going to probably lose out over a couple turns. However, with the support of Wraith Lords or maybe even other Wraith Blade units coming in to support, that unit of Terminators is going to be cut off, isolated, and quickly destroyed. And then you will gain the advantage and you will be able to charge or shoot something else the next turn. But you might be asking me, well, that may be all well and good, but how do I position my troops in a good way to be able to make the best out of this ability? Because again, this ability is kind of a high skill cap ability. You do need to know how to position units correctly so you can make the most out of it. When you are using this ability, you need to make sure that you leave gaps within your lines so that your units can actually perform these heroic interventions and get into engagement range. So what we're going to take a look at here is we're going to take a look at an example of a unit of, let's say, 5 Rangers, which are going to be marked in red, screening for a unit of Wraith Blades. So this is actually very common. I use Rangers a lot to screen for my more important units. This allows them to take the brunt of the hit so that the Wraith Blades don't get damaged before they get a chance to strike. So essentially, the enemy unit charges into the Rangers because they can't hit the Wraith Blades. And when they do that, they're going to land within 3 inches of your Wraith Blades, which you have to make sure, as it's marked on the diagram, you have to make sure your Wraith Blades are going to be within 3 inches of that enemy unit so that they can then use Heroic Intervention to get into contact with that unit. Now, here's the other thing. You need to leave gaps between your troops. You can't put all your troops together. If you do, you will be unable to engage in most cases. Unless you're in a ruin or something where engagement range is 2 inches, it's going to be kind of hard to get all your Wraith Blades in engagement. So that's why we're leaving those gaps in between our unit. So, I mean, these gaps, typically, you're going to be able to do this anyway and want to do this anyway because you're going to want to screen as much distance as possible so that that enemy unit can't just go around the Rangers and hit your Wraith Blades. So you're going to want to do that anyway, but leaving those gaps is really important to make sure that the Wraith Blades can fit in. And this goes for Wraith Lords as well. So let's say that we're trying to use this with a Wraith Lord. So in this case, we know that maybe they have a unit of 5 Terminators coming in and trying to hit your Wraith Lord. And let's say that we have a few Wraith Blades surrounding that Wraith Lord. So what we're going to want to do to make sure that the Wraith Lord can actually engage is, once again, we're going to want to spread out our unit so that it can correctly screen for the Wraith Lord. And in this case, I've actually placed them around the Wraith Lord so that the unit cannot just go around. Whatever way they hit, they'll have to go through that unit of Wraith Blades first. We've also left gaps in the formation of 2 inches so that the Wraith Lord can then heroically intervene and get within engagement range. So in this case, the Wraith Lord has plenty of room to get within engagement and is placed within 3 inches of combat so that it can use its heroic intervention. And this is really good as well, not just with Wraith Blades, but honestly with other troop choices. Things like Dire Avengers, for example. If you leave some gaps within a Dire Avenger unit, it's going to make it a lot harder for enemy units to actually get in there to fight and not lose the unit at the same time. Remember, Dire Avengers, Rangers are not very good in combat, so a lot of enemies are going to want to get into combat with those units as fast as possible. And a well-placed Wraith Lord with this trait can pretty much stop them dead in their tracks. And again, like I said before, make them think twice about performing a charge on a unit that it knows will probably end up heroically intervening and killing it, right? In the case of the Wraith Lord. Now, just as those other 2 examples were good examples of how to position your units for heroic intervention correctly, this is an example of how not to do it. So in this case, we have a unit of 5 Wraith Blades all together, squished together close to an enemy unit that is charged in. In this case, the Wraith Lord is not going to be able to engage because even though it is within 3 inches, it's not going to be able to get within that 1-inch engagement range that it needs to attack. So therefore, it's just not going to be able to do any damage, and you're going to be wasting the ability. So a lot of times players will do this because this is what they would do in normal situations. In normal games, they just kind of block it off completely so that the unit couldn't do a double charge or something like that, couldn't slip through the cracks. But it actually doesn't pay off in this situation because, again, the Wraith Lord cannot actually engage that enemy unit now, even though it's within 3 inches. So when you are using this trait with your Wraith units, the Wrath of the Dead trait, you want to make sure that you're leaving gaps within your units, and you don't always have to do this, but if you know that your opponent is going to charge that unit at some point next turn, and again, this requires some forward thinking, this requires some, premeditation, so to speak, some prescience, then you want to leave gaps within that screening unit so that your Wraith Lords or Wraith Guard can get through easily and make all of their attacks. So in conclusion, Wrath of the Dead may seem like a weaker trait at first, but it can actually be extremely powerful in Wraith-centric lists if used correctly. And a lot of players are going to look at the Flung Craftworld traits and say, well, I would much rather have Wording Runes or, Masters of Concealment or something like that. I'd rather not have this trait. I'd rather just have more survivability with my Wraith units. But I would actually argue that this trait has a lot of merit over those other selections because it actually gives you a lot of versatility and allows your units to support each other much better, and in fact, indirectly gives your units a lot more movement, especially when enemy units are charging you a lot. And against the new armies that are coming out, like Chaos Demons and the Tyrannid and stuff like that, right? They have a lot of combat units that actually want to get into melee with you. So having a trait like this can really help you not only be able to get some extra damage in during your opponent's turn, and now your opponent's going to have to think a little bit more about what he wants to charge and when. In addition, something like this could give you a little bit of extra movement, which again is something Wraith armies typically struggle with that speed 5. All right, everybody. I know that was kind of a quick video, but I wanted to go over it because I think that this trait, even though it's not talked a lot, has a lot of merit. And it's been something that I've been using in a Wraith Flung Craftworld for a while now in one of my lists, and it works fantastically, especially against armies that rely on close combat. All right, everybody, peace out. We have another video coming out soon on Necrons, how to deal with Necrons effectively nowadays, because obviously, because of the new Nephilim changes and some of the buffs that Necrons got, they are dominating the tournament scene. They're a very powerful player, and a lot of players are having issues with them. So we're going to talk about that. I have a few strategies and tips to share with you guys on how to deal with Necrons properly. And yeah, that's it. So leave suggestions in the comments if you have them. They're always appreciated, and have a great one, everybody. Peace out. See you guys later.